Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today we are joined by Paul Schoenfeld, Commercial and Product Development Manager for CCS at TGS. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you for having me. Excited to talk to you about CCS today.
Thank you. We're excited to have you here. So why don't we start things off by having you tell us about yourself and TGS as a company?
Surely. So my name again is Paul Schoenfeld, and I have about 30 years in the oil and gas industry, working for Shell Oil for most of my career. And my background has primarily been in business development and commercial roles. At Shell, that's where I cut my teeth in the CCUS market or arena by leading an initiative to support our Gulf Coast mitigation plans for mitigation of CO2 for emissions and scoping out what could be done and viable opportunities for CCUS. After leaving Shell is when I was recruited by TGS to help build their products and solutions around CCS. So a bit about TGS. TGS is a leading provider of data and insights to the energy sector. The company has been around for 40 years and got its start really processing the seismic multi-client acquisition of offshore and onshore subsurface data for companies that are looking to prospect for oil and gas. And as many companies have migrated in the past few years, TGS was looking how to leverage its skills and capabilities it's built up over the years to pivot to really focus on energy transition opportunities in this particular space. And we have a number of business themes, including CCS, of course. We have wind and solar, as well as geothermal and deep sea mining of minerals. But in particular, we have our growing energy transition business. And at the end of the day, what TGS is really about is helping companies de-risk their energy projects by leveraging its world-class subsurface data and largest well data library and the put to bear.
Thank you. So in your conversations today, what industry challenges are you hearing about?
Let me start off with the positive opportunities that I'm hearing about or that have occurred. And that really starts with the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act that occurred last August. And that's been a huge boost or catalyst for the industry in terms of really enabling more certainty around what the regulatory incentives or tax incentives and credits will be, and boosting the incentives for companies to really start to mature and progress their CCS opportunities. So that's been really positive. Saying that, there still remains challenge with the economics of some of the CCS projects, especially with the harder to abate emissions. So there's a real need for having better access to data and understanding better insight on how the project from soup to nuts will actually be developed and the viability from not just the economics, but from the transport of the CO2, from capture to storage, and then also a great deal of insight around the storage of the CO2 and the various options around that. And in addition to the economics, I would say also that Inflation Reduction Act is a kind of a funny name in the respect there has been a lot of inflation in the supply chain for various bits that has driven costs higher, which has taken away a little bit of the economics, but still taken away a little bit of the advantage of the economics provided by the enhanced incentives for the Inflation Reduction Act. But on balance, it's been a great catalyst for the industry. The second thing that I would really say is that the permitting side of maturing projects has taken longer than I think foreseen. So there's still a bit of time required to get your Class 6 permit approved after applying for a Class 6 permit there is still an ongoing regulatory review occurring for offshore projects in the Gulf of Mexico. So I think on that side, there's still a bit of a challenge to see that expedited, but there's work in that area. I know that that's something that has been looked at and addressed, but this is a whole new arena. So by nature, it will require some time.
Of course. So you had mentioned earlier in that question the importance of data. How can better data aid CCS projects across the value chain?
Data turning into insights will help across every segment of the value chain. If you think about the complexity of capturing CO2, then transportation of that CO2 to an endpoint, as well as the storage of the CO2, given the complexity of that whole project value chain, there is a need for better data to make sure that the economics are viable for this project to meet the project's objective of maturing and getting done, but also in different parts of the value chain. And I'm going to speak to the segment of the value chain that certainly being at TGS and where we play across the board is the storage for CO2. And if I look at the storage of CO2, companies need to have really good insight to understand what their options are for the storage of CO2, whether it's going to be in the saline aquifer or oil and gas depleted reservoirs, onshore or offshore. And at TGS, we have a number of solutions that help companies with that particular challenge. And number one, we have a solution that helps companies get started in evaluating their prospects for storage. It's called Carbon Axiom. We can talk about that a little bit later. We also provide processing and seismic imaging for companies that are looking to provide their Class 6 application for a baseline study of their storage site that they've selected post their initial screening and evaluation. We also have a solution offshore, even though most of the activity thus far has been onshore in the US and North America. But from an offshore perspective, we have ways to help increase the insight for the storage of the CO2 and what's going to happen with that CO2 in the subsurface. One of the solutions that we provide is something called an extended high resolution seismic shoot, along with putting some things on the subsea bed called ocean bottom nodes. We can take a really nice profile of a particular location to evaluate for CO2 storage. In addition to that, we have a solution for the long-term monitoring and surveillance of a storage site. It's something we call DOS VSP. It's been around in the oil and gas industry. What does DOS VSP mean? It stands for Distributed Acoustic Sensors, Vertical Seismic Profile. But what it is in layman's terms, it's taking a fiber cable and placing it down hole and having that fiber cable provide continuous information of the subsurface conditions to help understand what's happening with the CO2 being injected in that storage location, and being able to monitor that CO2 for the long haul, which is a requirement for companies that are applying for their Class 6 permit. So that's really some of the key challenges that companies are trying to address in their understanding and assessing of CO2 storage. That's only one piece of the puzzle. There's also the capture and transport. And one of the things that we also help companies do, and it's a solution that we can provide from a company that we just recently acquired, is a digitalization solution that provides asset management and asset optimization, as well as tracking of CO2 across the whole value chain for clients. And that's something, especially with the major storage projects that are really pursuing a spoke and hub model, will really need to make sure they can manage that information flow, which gets becomes very complex when you have a lot of different aggregation of CO2 from different sites and what have you.
Right. So I ask this question pretty often on the podcast, but I do think it's important to hear the response from different parts of the industry. Looking ahead, where do you see potential opportunities or even maybe some more challenges in the CCS industry?
I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity now with the Inflation Reduction Act. And one of the things that I see as well, so we'll start off with opportunities first, is that collaboration. There's a significant opportunity for continued, I'll say, because I do see collaboration within the industry, but really making sure that as a whole, the industry collaborates across the board for projects because of the complexity of the projects when you're talking about CO2 capture, transport, and storage. And the infrastructures, particularly for the transport, is pretty nascent. So we need that collaboration, and we need the industry to come together to expedite and mature projects now rather than later. So that's an opportunity. But with saying that, it's also a bit of a challenge. Having worked at Shell for most of my career, you do have a lot of companies involved in some of these projects, and that could be a challenge because of just by nature, the different timelines that companies might be on, and different agendas that might be at play that just takes some time for projects to mature by nature. I would also say that with that complexity, there's opportunity in terms of having new technologies emerge for those harder to abate emissions. So that's an opportunity. I every day see a news article about, or have some sort of market research highlighting new emerging technologies to bring down the cost of CO2 capture, as well as some other novel ways to move the CO2 from point of capture to point of storage. And what I also see as an opportunity is the solutions to help these companies along the way, as we talked about earlier, from better understanding of not only where the projects are located, where the storage opportunities are located, but where the emitters might be located to help bring those players together to perhaps partner for a better way to aggregate the CO2 captured and drive economies of scale to unlock additional projects. That's something that I see as an opportunity as well. I also see the opportunity for new solutions to help companies manage the information across the whole value chain. I alluded earlier to a solution we have called Predictor that can help companies track and manage that flow because of the complexity in each stage of the CO2 project, CO2 capture and storage project, and the importance of making sure that there's good information to recoup the incentives associated with the capture and storage of that CO2 into the subsurface in storage location.
All right. So one thing that you'd mentioned earlier that I wanted to circle back to was carbon axiom. Could you provide some more details about this solution and which industries will be benefiting the most from carbon axiom?
Carbon axiom is a prospecting and evaluating solution, web-based solution that we developed using and leveraging our large subsurface data to really help clients at the front end of evaluating projects for storage, as well as the opportunity to look at capture sites. We have both above ground content and subsurface information to really help get started on companies' roadmap for CO2 storage opportunities and projects. And as far as which industries will benefit from carbon axiom, it's industry agnostic. It's any industry or any company within any industry that's looking for an opportunity to store their CO2. We have both oil and gas depleted reservoirs mapped out on a very user-friendly solution that provides the specific data around the potential for storage. We also have saline aquifers that provides the same level of detail of information. So it's really a fantastic tool to help companies really get started in evaluating projects, and it provides not only the storage evaluation or storage sites, the solution also provides where the various emitters are around the country and what the volume of emissions are for each of those industrial sites. It provides the infrastructure for pipelines as well as information around the land ownership, because that's also a very important piece of the entire puzzle in terms of who owns that particular pore space, because it's the landowners who have the ownership over the storage onshore with the pore space. So we provide all that in a very straightforward solution, and it's something that we've really gotten some good feedback on from our clients that are using the solution today to help them with their prospecting.
I'm sure it sounds like a great resource. So, Paul, we are coming near the end of our time here. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I would just say thank you for having me. If there is any questions from anybody or interest in talking about any of the solutions or how TGS can help provide support, we are happy to help. And thank you again for having me join you on the podcast.
Of course. Yes. Thank you for being here with us today. Again, we are joined by Paul Schoenfeld, Commercial and Product Development Manager for CCS at TGS. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into today's podcast. If you are interested in being a podcast guest, please reach out to Carbon Capture Magazine, and we will talk to you next time. Have a great day.